So I would say that stress is the number one causal factor in disease. Now, there's obviously all sorts of exceptions, but I would say it's the number one. In my book, I talk about this. You have genetics, you have the environment, right? That's the epigenetic. So it's the diet that you eat, exercising or sedentary, sleep, like go through the whole, I call it the de-stress protocol. So diet, exercise, stress reduction, toxin removal, rest, emotional balance, science-backed supplements, and then a success mindset. So you can kind of go through that. So are you doing all these different things? But typically there's genetics, the epigenetics, which is, as they call it, loading the gun, right? And then there's a triggering event of stress that really then the body begins to slide. And when that happens, now you get diagnosed with whatever the disease is, Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, you name it. So stress, without a doubt, if you can do everything else as you just stated, take all the supplements in the world that you want, but if you don't fix the stress, difficult to ever fully get well.
Hi, I'm Kelley Namiro. Welcome to the Balancing Chaos podcast, a lifestyle podcast where we'll talk about wellness, motherhood, and some really exciting things in between. My goal is to help you develop a lifestyle that promotes health, wholeness, and success. Through my conversations with our experts and guests, I hope to inspire you to live a beautiful, full, and joyful life as you navigate balancing the chaos. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Balancing Chaos podcast. We have a very, very incredible guest this week. I am so excited to welcome Dr. Stephen Cabral, a seasoned naturopath, Ayurvedic, and functional medicine practitioner. I actually was just telling Dr. Cabral before we hopped on about how his book was one of the first books that I read when I was on my healing journey. And his journey into health and wellness started with his own battle against severe health complications at just 17 years old. And after consulting with different doctors and treatments with no success, he found hope through an alternative health doctor who changed his life. So fast forward to today, Dr. Cabral has nearly 2 decades of experience, a doctoral degree in naturopathy, and a wealth of different certifications. His unique insights come from worldwide internships, including clinics in India, Sri Lanka, China, Europe, and the United States. But today's episode is very special because we are going to dive into some lab tests that Dr. Cabral had me do. And I actually haven't even heard about any of them yet at this point. And so we're going to find out about my health, and we'll talk a lot about how you can do some of this at-home testing on your own to better understand what is going on in your body and the next step forward in how to fix it. So I'm so excited to have you on, Dr. Cabral. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for being here. So I kind of, in the intro, gave a brief kind of, little blurb about how you went through some health issues of your own. Are you open to talking about some of that and giving the listeners some insights into what you went through? Because I think that when people go through, like for me too, like their own health challenges, it kind of like really propels you to want to help other people to understand that they can get over it and come out on the other side.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And the thing about natural health is that it's such an expansive and complicated field that to really embrace it and want to be a part of it and learn it and then teach it, most people have gone through their own health struggles. And that's what I found. I mean, I've really found that in most health-based professions, that if you're in that, whether you're a chiropractor, acupuncturist, or naturopath, health coach, is that you went through your own struggles, you were essentially given no hope, and then you met someone that, or maybe multiple practitioners that were able to open your eyes to a new way of thinking. And that's essentially exactly what happened for me. So from 17 years old to 19 years old, I went to a couple dozen different medical doctors and specialists, and they had no idea what was wrong with me. So 2 years of essentially suffering to then meet a natural health practitioner. And this is back in the 90s. So in the mid 90s, you didn't have the internet, right? And so if you didn't have the internet, you didn't know like what was out there. I mean, literally, people who weren't around back then, they don't understand that you had a yellow pages.
Instagram did not exist. I don't even know how I found a naturopath. Like, because I remember when I was going through my health struggles, what really kicked everything off was a thyroid issue, and no Western, because it was subclinical hypothyroidism. No Western doctor, when they were drawing my labs, was ever able to be like, this is off, until I found a naturopath. And that took me years. So I can't even imagine how hard that was for you to find.
No, it was literally just serendipity. A neighbor said, "Hey, there's a natural health clinic in Cambridge, Massachusetts," and we lived one town over in Medford. And so next thing I know, I go to this doctor's office, and it was just like they were speaking a different language. They were talking about my adrenals, they were talking about thyroid, they were talking about food sensitivities, they were talking about digestive dysfunction, and it was so different that I was so skeptical. And I didn't necessarily believe right away. However, we ran some of the labs that we're actually going to talk about here today. And I started to understand that there is a much deeper level to health than just looking at your blood work and only looking at surface level based medical conditions. So basically, if nothing pops up on your blood work, that means then you're perfectly healthy. Well, we know that that's not the case, right? An absence of disease does not equal optimal health. And so what I started to understand is that although the only thing I could find on my blood work was suboptimal white blood cells, and they knew I didn't have cancer, they knew I didn't have HIV or any of these different things that may throw off my white blood cells, they didn't know what to look next. Well, lo and behold, a year goes by, and then I'm diagnosed with Addison's disease. I'm diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, type 2 diabetes, mast cell activation syndrome, and I could go on, about another half a dozen things. But it was all because my immune system was shutting down. So nothing was functioning properly. So again, this is back in the 90s. Fast forward towards 2006. And unfortunately, it took me 10 years, but I met my mentor. Mm-hmm. My mentor pulled together functional medicine testing with Ayurvedic-based medicine and genetics. And once we did that, I was better within 6 months. No more rheumatoid arthritis, no more Addison's disease, no more anything. I was completely healthy from that point on. Now, I will say one thing is that I didn't know, even back then at 27 years old, what true health meant. So every year I feel better than I did the year before. And I'm in my mid 40s now. So that's the thing is like, once you can harness health and you can learn more about it, you can continue to up level and wake up every day with abundant energy instead of the lack of cortisol production and energy like I had with Addison's disease. So that's my backstory. And I've spent now the last couple of decades, as you said, trying to help people heal as well from an array of different health-based issues.
That's amazing. I'm guessing, and I could be totally wrong because I haven't seen a photo of you from 20 years ago, but I'm guessing you look completely different than you did with Addison's disease and type 2 diabetes. Is that correct?
Well, I went from about 160 pounds to 135 pounds, and my body was just wasting away.
Yeah.
And it was awful. And I would have highs and lows and brain fog. I'd have debilitating allergies. If I walked up, this is not an exaggeration, if I walk up one flight of stairs, I'd have to sit down because I had something called POTS as well, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And it's basically you get a irregular and accelerated heart rates. You get lightheadedness upon standing. It's really brutal. It's because you can't regulate your electrolytes. And you can't regulate your electrolytes because your adrenals don't work. And so there's hormones called norepinephrine, cortisol, and aldosterone that are supposed to help regulate sodium to potassium. And we'll be talking about some of those here today. But nobody ever told me this. And honestly, medical doctors don't really learn it. They graze over it into in medical school. And so that's why I'm never putting down conventional medicine. But I do recommend that everybody have a medical doctor. So you look at just disease-based diagnosis, but everybody should have an integrative health practitioner or a health coach, someone like yourself as well, that they can meet with, they can talk with about the deeper levels of why we get sick in the first place. Because disease isn't just a happenstance, like, oh, I woke up at 17 with rheumatoid arthritis. No, it was developing years before that. And I didn't see the signs.
Right. Talk to us before we kind of get into like the people who you help and some of the tests that you run. And then we go into my lab work. Talk to us a little bit about kind of how that works. Because I think that a really common misconception, at least what I hear in my own practice, is that there is this idea that like, oh, it's genetic. It's like, it's all like, I have this, even like if, people who have diabetes, they're like, oh, well, my mom had that, so now I have it, or high blood sugar or whatever it is. So can you talk a little bit about what the reality is in terms of like what percentage is really genetic in terms of some of these chronic disease and symptoms that people are feeling, and what percentage is actually lifestyle triggered?
Yeah, it's a great question. So everything is genetic, but at the same time, there's something called epigenetics that I'm sure you probably touched on as well. And that is how lifestyle actually affects our genes. So your genes will never really change. There's debate on that. There's the debate that you can change your genes from generation to generation. I love those debates and conversations as well. But at least for you, unless you're doing gene editing with some very fancy new, CRISPR-based technology, your genes don't change. And even with CRISPR, they're not changing. They're basically deleting and other things as well. But what happens is there's these proteins, essentially, or enzymes called single nucleotide polymorphism, SNPs. And that's what turns on genes that could cause things like autoimmune-based issues. But there's always an underlying root cause as to why. So let me just give you an example. All of my grandparents, so all four, had rheumatoid arthritis. So there was a really good bet that I was going to get it, especially since both of my parents had rheumatoid arthritis. And so they got it in their later 40s to early 50s. I got it at 17. Why? Because I'd already filled up that proverbial rain barrel. It overflowed, right? So how did it overflow? 3 years of straight antibiotics. I'd taken over 3,000 capsules of amoxicillin because my dermatologist gave me amoxicillin to help get rid of acne. Lo and behold, it destroyed my gut, which destroys my immune system. And it allows, every time I eat now, all this protein and bacteria are now moving in my bloodstream. It's heightening my white blood cells, my immune system. The bacteria may end up going to my joints, and it sets off my genetics, which had rheumatoid arthritis there. And so the interesting thing is that I had rheumatoid arthritis at 17, didn't have it at 16, don't have it now in my mid-40s. So genes can be turned on and off. So while they say that about 5% to 10% of all disease is genetic, what they really mean by that is that you are born with an innate genetic or metabolic based, let's call it disorder, that eventually comes to fruition in your life. But it's always predicated by filling up that rain barrel and ending up with other symptoms that lead to that disease.
Okay. I love that you gave that example and you kind of talked about the rain barrel, which is the rain barrel effect, which is your book. Because like I said, that was one of the first books that I read. And I never, really recognized until that point in my life, 6 years ago, when I got interested in all of this, that wow, years of no sleep and chronic stress and all the antibiotics I took from the age of 12 to 15 had a huge impact on then what's going on with my hormones at 28 or 27 years old. And so talk a little bit more. I mean, you just briefly explained it, but about the rain barrel effect and kind of what that compounding effect is for people and their health, and how, if you get a health condition, like you said, it's years in the making almost.
Yes. So we know that Alzheimer's is 20 years in the making.
Wow.
So it doesn't happen overnight. We know cardiovascular disease is at least 5 to 10 years. Same with high blood pressure. And so when we look at all these top causes of mortality, we know that it's really starting from now, unfortunately, childhood, teenage years, all the way through just mid-adults. And once you get to 40, 50 years old, you're like, oh, I'm over the hill. This always happens in your 40s, or this is just what happens when you get to your 50s. Well, no, it's not. It's just that you've, over the years, built up so much toxicity and also removed so much of what I call your vital reserves or deficiencies that your body can no longer maintain homeostasis. And so just an example, we work with so many new moms and so many mothers in our practice. Our practice is about 75% women. And so, well, what happens? So you think about this, when you are, you're 9 months, 40 weeks or so, right, of developing new life inside of you that's using a lot of your vital reserves that most women don't even know. So they're using a lot of those B vitamins, they're using calcium, they're using magnesium, they're using omega-3 fatty acids, all those things. Your baby's going to get those nutrients no matter what, and it's taking it from you. So are you getting enough? Oh, I don't know. And then you deliver, hopefully, this, beautiful, healthy child. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I didn't expect to not sleep anymore. Or yes, I'm in bed. Maybe I'm in bed for 10 hours a night, maybe more. But what's happening is I'm woken up every hour, every half hour, every hour and a half. So it's not quality sleep. And then the next day you have brain fog and you're not thinking, as clearly as you could be, because obviously now you're suffering from less sleep. And maybe your food choices aren't as good as they used to be. And you're exercising now less because you're more exhausted. And so you have the stress, you have all these compounding things. So that's the rain barrel effect, as they begin to build up. For me, it was senior year of high school. playing sports, trying to do well in school, get into college. There was friendships, there was dating, there was me working a job after school. So many different things were going on, right? And so plus the antibiotics, plus the poor eating. I was eating, back then, Little Debbie snacks and Kool-Aid. I just we didn't know any better. Like, it's just the way it was. Yeah, and no one's to blame. It's just that was the times. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and that was just kind of the way that it was. And so when we look at that, it was just a matter of time before I ended up with the disease. Now, why me and not all the other kids and people that were doing that? Well, that's what comes then down to sometimes the Ayurvedic-based constitution and a little bit of your mitochondrial-based genetics. And so I just filled up my rain barrel faster. I was probably a little bit more stressed, a little bit more of like a perfectionist than the average individual, for better or for worse. And then that happens. So sometimes it's not best to always ask, why me, but rather, why did this happen? And if you can continue to peel back the onion and figure out what happens, well, then you can go about the healing process. I learned that over a period of 10 years. I learned what not to do for the first 2 to 3 years. And then practitioner by practitioner, I said, oh, okay, this is working a little bit. That's working a little bit. I would relapse. I would start to get better and then relapse. That's most people's recovery.
Right.
But if you find someone like I found Dr. Pete, who's been through it before, I mean, she was 70 years old. She had done this a long time. She was able to piece together a plan that helped me to empty that rain barrel so I could begin to heal. Because the last thing I'll say is this, is that if you put your body in position to heal by removing the toxicities and replacing those deficiencies, your body knows how to heal. So a good practitioner does not heal you. They put your body in position to heal itself.
I love that. And that's like really the methodology and the philosophy that I use in my own practice. Like, I think that the body absolutely has the potential, if you're doing the right things, to heal itself. One question I want to ask you before we dive into everything else is, I think that it's really hard to, especially for somebody who's not, necessarily a doctor, to put a number on the amount of like pressure that stress puts on our, like the potential for us to have chronic disease or not. And I know what I've seen in myself is that even if I am eating all the right foods and taking all the supplements and doing all the things, if I'm super stressed out, like all my hormones can still be really off. So I'm curious to your thoughts as to how much does stress play a role for people with certain imbalances in chronic disease?
So I used to say, and I still say it to this day, that if I could only work on 2 things with people in my practice, if I couldn't work on a lot of the fancy things that we may do, I would work on the gut, which is digestion. And so there's 4 main things that can go wrong with the gut. And that's parasites, H. pylori bacterial infection, SIBO, so small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or candida. And then of course there's leaky gut. So I would fix those and I would work on stress. But if I could only pick one, especially I've been teaching something called high performance health, which is basically on longevity, studying the longest lived people. Well, when you look at all the different factors, about 2/3 of them are like decreasing stress. I mean, they really are, if you boil it down. And so I would say that stress is the number one causal factor in disease. Now, there's obviously all sorts of exceptions, but I would say it's the number one. In my book, I talk about this. You have genetics, you have the environment, right? That's the epigenetic. So it's the diet that you eat, exercising or sedentary, sleep, like go through the whole, I call it the de-stress protocol. So diet, exercise, stress reduction, toxin removal, rest, emotional balance, science-backed supplements, and then a success mindset. So you can kind of go through that. So are you doing all these different things? But then there's what I say, there's a triggering event. I had my own triggering event in high school. There's a period of like a month where I was just starting school. I was taking my SATs. I was like doing sports that fall. There was just so much stress. I was working at the same time. I wasn't able to do it all. And that's when my body collapsed. Like that's when I had the big immune-based breakdown. Now, was I taking the 3 years of antibiotics and all the poor eating? Yes. But typically there's genetics, the epigenetics, which is, as they call it, loading the gun, right? And then there's a triggering event of stress. Right. That really then the body begins to slide. And when that happens, now you get diagnosed with whatever the disease is, Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, you name it, right? Psoriasis, migraines, etc. So stress, without a doubt, if you can do everything else as you just stated, take all the supplements in the world that you want, but if you don't fix the stress, difficult to ever fully get well.
Yeah. And I wanted you to put that in your own words, because I kind of knew the answer, but I think that you saying it to our listeners, it really empowers them to say like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do all of these, tangible things, but I really want to work on my mindset, and I really want to work on managing stress and implementing some of those tools, because that's what's actually going to get you the results that you want, in my opinion, as well. So, you mentioned that 75% of your practice is women. Talk to us about kind of because you have, if I was like on your website, you guys sent me some of the tests, but I was like looking at all of the other testing options that you guys offer. Talk to us a little bit about some of like who is your patient base, and like, what are you don't have to run through obviously all of the tests that you offer, but like some of the high level things that people can kind of come and look at and get results for, and how they kind of can get, because I think that when you're looking at the results on your own, I know that you offer, support with all of that as well. So talk to us a little bit about how that works.
So I made a promise at 19 years old when I was sitting in a natural health practitioner's office in the Marino Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I said that if I'm ever able to figure this out, because I'd hope, once again, I was seeing a natural health doctor, this was different, like, oh, maybe they'll figure it out. And I said, if I ever figure this out, I'm going to share it with the world. And that's been my mission ever since. Now, I couldn't make good on that until about 4 years ago or 5 years ago. And that's when I took my Boston practice and I brought it online with my podcast. And I also brought all the lab testing, all the protocols we do. It was a slow process to get 150 basically tests and protocols online. But that's what we've done. And so now we've open sourced this, which means you no longer have to ask your doctor to run a lab test. You can have all the protocols at your fingertips. And we ship to 27 countries around the world. And everything comes with a consultation, because the worst thing is you get your results and then you Google them and you think that you're dying, or you get these awful results when really someone can help make sense of all of this for you. Right. And so we run everything from gut testing to heavy metal toxicity to mold. We do a lot of hormone testing. So we look at estrogen dominance in women. Estrogen dominance is often confused with low thyroid. And so we'd love to be able to run one test called the stress, mood, and metabolism test that looks at estrogen to progesterone. Looks at it right around days 19, 20, or 21 of your cycle, when progesterone should be at its highest, its peak, and estrogen should just be low or low normal. So we look at that. We look at testosterone, DHEA, free T3, free T4, because that's so important, rather than just looking at TSH. We look at cortisol throughout the day. We look at vitamin D3 on that lab test, hemoglobin A1C, and insulin. It's a phenomenal test. Actually,
what is that one called? Because I feel like that's so comprehensive for a woman.
It's called the stress, mood, and metabolism test. And I wish we ran it with you. And the reason is, if we did, I would have been able to show you the correlations between cortisol and your electrolytes. They're two different lab companies. So basically with labs, you need a doctor to sign off. So me and my team, we sign off on it for you. But they're different labs. Like, we don't own any of these labs. We just get them to you. That's the goal. And then obviously we give you a plan, because data without a plan, it's dangerous. Like, you don't know what to do. We've worked with over 250,000 people, over 300,000 now. So we have the data to also know it works. And that's what I love, is saying there's no more guesswork. People always say, "Oh, I'll be the guinea pig for this." Like, no, nobody needs to be the guinea pig anymore.
I love that, because a lot of the clients, I have to have a doctor, like you said, like sign off on a lot of the testing that I do. But then like a lot of the people who follow me online or can't run labs through me, they want a way to do it at home. And like this provides that for them. And the reason I like the specific test that you're talking about is because I want you to talk a little bit about kind of like that cascade of cortisol to thyroid to ovaries for a second, because oftentimes when we see, at least when I see in my practice, clients who have high cortisol, that kind of suppresses the thyroid. And then we see issues with maybe low progesterone, estrogen dominance, kind of some of the stuff you were just talking about. So if that was the case for somebody, and that was kind of the way that their labs were playing out, again, because I see that specific pattern a lot, what are some of the symptoms they would be feeling? And then maybe like one or two general recommendations that you would have for somebody going through that.
Sure. So there's something called the HPA axis that many people have heard about. That's the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland inside of the brain, sending signals to the adrenals, right? And the adrenals produce norepinephrine, excitatory neurotransmitter. It gets the heart rate going, gets the blood pumping. It's like adrenaline. You feel that rush, that surge. And there's cortisol, which is a natural anti-inflammatory that people don't talk about. It's really actually good for the body if it's not overdone. And then cortisol also breaks down stored glycogen or blood or sugar in the body that's stored in either the liver or the muscles or other places. And it uses that as a fast short-term fuel. So a lot of people talk about that, but they don't talk about the effect that the HPA, so the adrenals, have on the thyroid. Because once you start that fight or flight, that sympathetic nervous system dominance, once the adrenals get going, the norepinephrine is produced, you start to block TSH to T4. And as well as to T3. So basically inside of the thyroid, TSH is not the thyroid. It's the thyroid stimulating hormone. And again, I'm sure you've shared this many times, but what happens is T4 is often pretty good. Like, okay, like I've got good T4, but two things can happen. The body's not producing T3, and it's not producing T3 because there's deficiencies. Vitamin B6 is a big one that almost nobody talks about. There's selenium, there's zinc, there's copper, there's iodine, right? So there's a lot of deficiencies that may be there that your endocrinologist will never tell you about. And then when you produce a lot of what are called glucocorticoids, a fancy name for cortisol, it can shift T3 to reverse T3.
Yes.
And so now it's unusable thyroid hormone. And so your TSH still stays elevated. The problem is in conventional medicine, normal is all the way up to a 5 for TSH. When in functional medicine, it's up to a 2. And so when we look at this, it's just much more comprehensive. And so if you're suffering from low thyroid, even if your endocrinologist doesn't say you have low thyroid, it can look like water retention, inflammation, weight gain, thinning of the hair, thinning of the last third of the eyebrow, dry skin, low libido, brain fog, and that's about it. Now, estrogen dominance, though, also can come into play, which is all of those symptoms, plus bloating, plus same with low thyroid, can actually be elevated cholesterol, and it can be oily skin, adult acne, and lowered mood, anxiety, depression. So how does estrogen play into this? There's one more axis. Well, there's a few more, but one of the next main axis is the hypothalamus pituitary gonad or gonadal axis. And so that affects the ovaries or the testes in men. And what happens is progesterone starts to be blunted as well. It changes luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone, but that we don't want to get too in the weeds. But what happens is you start to produce less of progesterone, which means then there's fertility-based issues. There's also issues with what we just spoke about, estrogen dominance, the bloating, the low mood. And this is really apparent. And you know it's estrogen dominance if you're fine for basically the first 2 weeks of your cycle and not so great for the last 7 to 10 days of your cycle. Yeah. It's much more likely to be estrogen dominance than it is low thyroid if you get the symptoms only the last week or so of your cycle.
Okay. That's super, super helpful. And so I would highly recommend anyone who's experiencing like a variety of those symptoms, brain fog, anxiety, irritability, maybe sometimes cycle irregularities, like go do this test, because then you actually will know what's going on and then what the steps you can take are to fix it and to reverse it. Because for me, just to kind of share how my story worked, I didn't really recognize about what you were talking about, how my stress and my adrenals were because I don't have, Hashimoto's or any sort of autoimmune condition, but how my adrenals were putting pressure on my thyroid. That was slowing down. It was subclinical hypothyroidism at the time. And then how that was then affecting, for me, it kind of just everything shut off. And like all my hormones started to turn off because the stress was so high. And I know it affects, different women in different ways, but to get the right answers so that you have the right direction to take, I think is so helpful. So everyone can find these on your website, right?
Yes, they're actually, if you go to equi.life, it's EQUI.LIFE. That's the practice. That's basically our online and virtual functional medicine practice that's worldwide. So that's where they can find them. But I'd also love to get you those labs to use with your clients too, as part of your packages if you'd like. So just let us know, because I think it'd be fantastic, because everybody needs a coach as well. That's what I want to stress. You don't want to run this, find it some obscure place, look at your results, and then figure out how to do this on your own. I did that for too long. It does not work out well. Now you can learn how to do this, and we teach this actually, and we certify people to run these labs as well through the Integrative Health Practitioner Institute. And that's, a little bit more for people who want to take it to the next level. But I'm just a huge believer that yes, learn through, someone like yourself,
right.
But everybody needs to be the health coach in their own home. Like I'm a big believer in that. There's just nowhere else that you're going to learn this. You might as well pass it on to your children, and they can pass it on to their children. It's the only way this is ever going to be taught, because they don't teach it in school. That's for sure.
And that's one of like my biggest gripes in life is that like, when I'm even like meeting with a client for the first time, I'm like, so, your menstrual phase, or like talking about your ovulatory, they're like, I don't know. What does that mean? Like, I've never learned anything about my cycle. I'm like, oh man, we've got a lot to teach all of whether it's the younger generations or the generation now. So I absolutely concur with that.
I really hope that you are enjoying this episode. I want to take a quick pause and invite you to come deeper with us if you're ready to explore the root cause connection to the symptoms that you're feeling. Whether you're bloated, exhausted, maybe you have brain fog, you can't lose weight. The WBK Health and Hormones course and our WBK membership and app are here to help you feel like you are empowered to take charge of your health and understand the real why behind you feeling how you do. And we give you the methods and protocols to heal with sustainable solutions. Right now, through Labor Day, get 10% off our annual membership on the WBK app with the code Balancing Chaos, all one word, BALANCINGCHAOS, and 20% off the Wellness by Kelley Health and Hormones course, and an emailed lab review with the code Balancing Chaos 20. That's BALANCINGCHAOS 20. These protocols in the course have meal suggestions, journal prompts, and supplement guides to help you heal whatever area of hormonal balance you're struggling with. With our membership, you'll receive a library of content and new workouts, recipes, and meditations every single week to keep you consistent and to allow your body to come back to its most vital state of being. Okay, now back to the episode.
Let's dive into, if you're ready, my results.
All right.
We did a minerals test and a metals test. Is that right?
Correct. We did a minerals and metals test. Okay. And what we look at on this is the presence of the main minerals that you use in your body. So we're going to go through calcium and we're going to go through magnesium and sodium and potassium. We'll go through phosphorus. We'll go through zinc, all these great minerals that your body needs. But we're also going to look at your heavy metals.
Okay.
And if there's elevated heavy metals, I'll just maybe give a quick explanation on that. Heavy metals can be found from anything from contaminants in the soil, so they get into our food. That's always possible, especially things like arsenic. There's mercury in sushi or tuna or a lot of larger based fish. Aluminum is in a lot of cookware, aluminum foil, antiperspirants, cosmetics, and much more. So if any of these pop up, these are environmental, for the most part, environmental-based toxins that get into our body. And if they're there, well, they cause more stress in the body. They cause inflammation. And that inflammation, remember, inflammation is never a root cause of a disease. However, inflammation is part of 90% or more of all diseases out there. But what it's showing you is that inflammation is caused by some type of immune-based dysfunction or damage inside of the body. So your body's immune system will respond to some type of hurt against itself with white blood cells in order to remove the pathogen or repair the injury. And when it does that, you're going to see inflammation, because that's part of actually the healing process. Now, in conventional medicine, they palliate inflammation in whatever way they can. Tylenol, Advil, NSAIDs, whatever they can use to remove that inflammation, right? Well, the inflammation is giving us a sign that something is wrong in the body. So although we'll help to modulate it naturally with certain herbs, we don't want to remove it. We actually want to remove the thing that's causing the inflammation.
Okay. I think that's really helpful, because I think there's a lot of confusion on what inflammation is. And I think everyone just is like, I want to get rid of the inflammation. Like it's like a fear-based mentality around inflammation these days, especially if you're in like the natural wellness world. And so I think that knowing that is really helpful. One thing that I want to talk about too, before we kind of go into what my results are, I'm nervous, is how we did this. So if I remember correctly, because this was actually a few months ago, it was a hair sample.
Yes.
So I cut a piece of my hair off in the back of like where no one could see where it's going to go, end up going in a ponytail or whatever, and then sent that off. And so that's kind of how somebody would do it. Talk to us a little bit too about the accuracy, because I know that's a question that people will likely have.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a bunch of different ways to test the human body. There's blood work. We're familiar with that. That's basically the venous blood draw. So that's fantastic. There's the big difference is though, our blood shows you what's available in the body and able to be used, right, at a homeostatic level. It doesn't, not at a tissue level, but it shows you what's able to be used. So it's a great marker for overall health. Then there's saliva. Saliva actually shows you what is being used by the body, which is why we like to use it for hormone testing. Yeah. However, it's not used for everything. You don't test it for vitamin D. You don't use it for thyroid. Thyroid is, we use a blood spot. So it's a simple finger prick at home, like you would do for basically testing your glucose levels. Then there's urine. Urine shows you what was used by the body. So we can test vitamin levels that way. We can look for yeast that way. We can look for neurotransmitter metabolites, really useful as well. Then there's stool testing, really the only way to accurately find parasites or H. pylori or bacterial overgrowth. So we do that. And then there's hair testing. And hair testing is essentially a protein. And what it does is, all it does is it captures whatever's being excreted out of the body, because it is a protein in and of itself. So what we do, and I'm going to ask you actually if you did this, we want people to cut close to the scalp, but not right at the scalp. They can take a bunch of little snips. You never see it. You know, we've given 10,000 pretend haircuts in our day. And so you never see that it's cut there. But what we're looking for then is just a quarter to a half an inch. And that's because humans grow about a quarter of an inch of hair per month. So if we look at a quarter inch, it's about the last 30 days, a half an inch, the last 60 days. And then if it's an inch and a half, it's about the last 90 days. And so I always ask people if, what they tested. And so I'm actually going to pause for a second, just ask you if you did that.
Yeah. So I cut mine like probably, I don't know, like let's say a quarter inch from the root. And then, so like the rest of the piece of however long my hair was there. So like it probably was missing, what you just said, like the last 30 days, but then everything else was there.
And then did you cut up that here, or did you just use an inch of it?
No, I cut it up into like little pieces and I put the whole thing in the sample.
Yes. Some people do that. All right. So it's going to change your results though. I just want you to know that. It's going to change how we read this. So it's good that you told me that. All right. So we want to specify this. It's actually important, because if we want just the last 90 days, then we only want about a half an inch or an inch and a half or so from the head, right? But if we look at the whole strand, we're now going back a year, right? Right. So like at least a year. So that's what we're looking at. And that's okay. So what the lab does though, is it takes the hair and burns it to an ash. And why do they do this? So they can actually look at the minerals inside the hair, which is the protein. Now, this is not new technology. It's been around for over 4 years. It's used on PubMed for pregnancy testing for heavy metals. They use it with FBI and drug testing. This is used literally all over the world in different agencies. Now, and one of the things is it's extremely accurate. It's how they get the mineral content of food. The way that we know that a lemon is very high in potassium is that it's burned to an ash, and we actually analyze the mineral content. All right. So when we're looking at yours, we're not going to look at what are Kelley's results from the last 60 to 90 days. We're going to look at what's it been like over the last year. Okay. And that's going to help us, because your results may have changed and are weighted differently over the last 60 days, and you'll update us, right? Because this is a back and forth. It's never about, that's why it's never about treating the numbers. It's actually listening to the individual and using that with their score to get a better picture of what's going on.
Okay, cool.
All right. So we always start with the first 4, which are the electrolytes. Feel free to interrupt, ask questions at any time. I don't want it to be a monologue necessarily. But when we look at the first 4 numbers, calcium and magnesium, sodium and potassium, we are not looking at, this person is taking a lot of salt in their diet or a lot of calcium in their diet. That's very rare. What it shows is these stress levels of the body. Are they balanced or not. And on this lab, you're going to see a low, a high, or right in that sweet spot, right in the middle. And for you, well, there's all sorts of different patterns people can have. The most common pattern is high calcium and low magnesium. Right. It means they're in a chronic stressed state, and their magnesium levels are low. And it's because they're not supplementing, they're not getting high magnesium foods. But one of the hallmarks of high cortisol or high stress is that it pulls calcium from your bones into your bloodstream. It doesn't necessarily put it back to your bones, and it can be excreted out through the hair. So we see that quite often. Now, your results are a little bit different. We see this about 20% of the time, Okay. Maybe just a little less, maybe 15%. It is called a 4-high pattern, and it means high acute stress in the body. Okay. So there's a couple caveats to this. So one, if we look at the adrenal stress stages, like if we look at, there's burnout, there's all these different things. You're more at the, let's say, second or third stage, heightened stress. At least you have been over the last year.
Yes.
So it's showing that the body's pulled in more calcium, but it's not only that, it's responding high with all levels. Now, the interesting thing about this is that it typically means the person's constitution is still strong. So they have a good, healthy, strong constitution, but there's a lot of stress in the body. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you have young kids now. Obviously you've got a lot of responsibilities, a lot of things going on. Does this seem to match at all?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, especially just in the last year, it has been one of the more stressful of, my life, with a toddler, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, that's already. And then trying to figure out a few different adjustments with work, and where my career is going and kind of what that is looking like. We had a miscarriage in May. And so it's just a lot of things that have kind of compounded over the last year. And I think it's just that those things are especially the emotional aspect and the mental stressor with work. It's those are things that kind of just don't really leave you very easily. And so I actually, after I did this test, I did a 6-week social media break. I made a really big shift and change with work where I'm no longer taking private clients anymore. And so I definitely recognized that stress was there. And so this kind of comes as no surprise to me. And it was definitely a catalyst for me to make some serious changes in my life. So,
and I'm glad you've already made those changes. This is not uncommon. We work with so many new moms, and it's not even just new moms, but every time you have a child, it's, you're a new mom again. All these same stressors, the lack of sleep, the trying to balance career at the same time as, making sure you're there for your children. I mean, women have to go through a lot more stress, I think, in that regard than men. And I don't necessarily love that it's validated on the lab test, but it is. Yeah. And you're obviously making the right decisions now to take back control of your health. And it's not, just as you said, it's not physical health all the time. It is stress. It is mentally, emotional based stress that causes a lot of the cascading health-based events. So I'm happy to see that you've done that.
And I know it's hard for people to sometimes see the results on a lab test, but in my opinion, this is just further kind of confirmation that I'm doing the right things, and that even though the changes that I'm making in my life at this point are very, full transparency, very uncomfortable, because it's change, and that is always uncomfortable. It's confirmation that I'm doing the right things, even though it feels awkward and weird. And so I think that anyone who is going to come in and do testing, with you, or, with whether another holistic practitioner, I think that it's a motivation and momentum tool at the end of the day, because it's okay, I kind of intuitively knew that something was off, and now I have confirmation of that. And the ball is really in my court to decide whether or not I want to make the change, or I want to keep living like this and feeling the symptoms of it. So yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't get better on its own. That's the thing, is that the change has to happen. And the only, solace that I try to give people is that you can correct any imbalance in about 12 to 16 weeks. Yes. That's the nice thing. And so this is also why, though, we do recommend at least annual functional medicine at home lab testing, if not semi-annual, so that these things never sneak up on you. But as you just said, you can intuitively know that you're filling up that rain barrel or something has to change. And at least in this season of life right now, because you can change things 5 years from now, 10 years, like you can have different variations of your career. But at least for right now, you know that this is what you need in order to be at your best for everybody else that you have to take care of. So I just commend that decision for sure.
Thank you. Absolutely. I think it's knowing that it can always change down the line is what we have to keep in mind. My question to you is, based on that first piece, would you recommend supplementing or do you not supplement?
Well, so we do. And so when we talked before about, if I can only fix one thing, it'd be stress. It doesn't mean that you sit down and you just meditate all day. Yeah. Because the most stressed people have the hardest time meditating, because how can you sit there and just shut off your mind? So that's why I like to tell people it actually does go back to everything, the diet, the exercise. So you're on an anti-inflammatory diet. You're doing a certain amount of intermittent fasting, but not over intermittent. Like for you, I would never say fast until noon. And I apologize if this goes against a lot of other guests and what they're saying, but there's a time and place for everything. And for each individual, that's what I learned. My internships were done all over the world. So in India and China and Europe, et cetera. And I was hoping to find like the silver bullet method that would work for everyone. What I realized was that everything worked for everyone, but not all at the same time. So you had to know what worked with what individual. And so if you're stressed and not eating, you're building up greater stress in the body. And so what we do is we make sure the body's in a safe spot. And you can take the normal amount of calories that you eat, and you can still have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You can still do intermittent fasting, but instead of 16 hours, maybe it's 12 hours for you. Maybe it's 14. It's like what feels right for you. And also right now, maybe it's different in 3 months from now. And supplementation, to me, it looks like you were taking some magnesium because your magnesium levels were strong. Almost nobody's magnesium levels were that strong unless you're supplementing. So I'll just ask that.
Yeah. I take magnesium every night for the most part. So definitely supplementing already with that, but curious about like the calcium and all of that stuff.
Yeah. So what we do for that is keep doing it magnesium. So that's excellent. And because basically magnesium calms the sympathetic nervous system. I mean, that's what it does. And then including more high potassium food-based foods in your diet. And a big part of that too is there are certain herbs that are really powerful for calming the nervous system. One of those is ashwagandha. Another one, well, they're not all herbs, is amino acid L-theanine. If we look at an extract called phosphoserine that helps lower cortisol levels, there's certain adaptogens like rhodiola, ginseng. And so we use those in a product called Adrenal Soothe. And so we'd recommend that, typically 1 with lunch and then 2 at dinner. And why that's powerful is it begins to then shift you out of the fight or flight to the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest and the repair. And then all these are weighted the second half of the day so that you have energy in the morning and then it kind of calms you down at night. Okay. And then if you can't sleep well at night, so I always recommend tracking your sleep, get 90 minutes of deep sleep, 2+ hours of REM. If you're not, use something like a non-groggy liquid melatonin, or use something called the sleep help support that has a little 5-HTP. So you can't use it if you're on an antidepressant, but you can use 5-HTP, just a small amount if you need to produce more serotonin, which then helps to produce more melatonin naturally. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but we need to fix stress and sleep first. And so those are like the baseline products. And then make sure you're taking a good methylated B vitamin. But we use the daily nutritional support or the daily activated multi. It already contains a methylated B vitamin. Yep. And so you're usually pretty good there. So that's where we would start with the 4 high on that pattern. And just remember, we'll be able to bring that down within 3 to 4 months. And so you could retest this then in 6 months. Well, you need to put in essentially 12 to 16 weeks in the protocol, let the hair grow out for a couple months. And then, so about 6 months or so, you could retest for sure after beginning a protocol. Yeah.
I definitely will retest. This stuff is like, I am such a nerd for this kind of stuff. I love, and it's funny because I look at other people's all day long, but it's very rare that I do this for myself. I mean, I'll look at my thyroid and stuff like that, but like knowing more data is always interesting to me. So I love this. So the metals we did too, right? And so that's a part of
So the rest of this, we looked at copper, manganese, zinc, chromium, selenium, and phosphorus. So there's just a couple that I want to call out. Your zinc is perfect. Your copper's a little low. Now, the reason why I call that out is that so zinc and copper, everything in the body has a partner. So basically there's an antagonist and an agonist. It goes back to, if you think about traditional Chinese medicine and the yin yang or the great Tao, there's always an opposing force. So if you give someone magnesium, it pushes down calcium. If you give someone calcium, it pushes down magnesium. So that's why you want to find the balance. If you give someone zinc, a lot of people supplementing with zinc now for the immune system. Good idea. No issues with that. The problem is, if they're not getting any copper, they're driving down their copper levels. And so your zinc is perfect. We recommend a product for you called Balanced Zinc. So there's 15 milligrams of zinc, but then there's 1 milligram of copper, because that's the balance. You don't want to take 15 milligrams of copper every day. You only need a small amount of copper. And so that's the balance between the two. Now, why this is important is that copper is needed for the thyroid and the mitochondria. So it's very important. And your selenium was low. And if you have lower selenium and you have lower copper, you oftentimes have lower thyroid because you're not able to make as much, or you can make it from the iodine, but you're not able to convert it as well to T3.
Okay. I love that. And that's something that I've even talked about in my practice. Somebody has said to me before, but to be truthful, I've never had tested any of these, minerals before. And so I never have known my own levels. And obviously selenium is such a big player in the thyroid. Is the way that most people get these nutrients or become deficient in these nutrients through diet? Because I feel like my diet is great, but I could be totally wrong.
Well, no, when you look though at where am I getting some of these nutrients, some of them are really random. If you want a good amount of selenium, Brazil nuts. Yeah. But how many people eat Brazil nuts? I mean, I don't eat Brazil nuts. So you can get it from seaweed, you can get it from kelp, you can get it from all these different things like your iodine. So that's why some people are deficient by diet, but some people are deficient just because their body's has to produce so much thyroid because of all the stress that they're under, right? That's one part of it. And so the stress has to play a big part. It depletes you over time. And also, as I said before, but having a child, hundreds of years ago, there was a prenatal diet, and a diet a woman ate to build up her nutrients in her body, her stores. And then there was a perinatal diet. It's what she ate when she was pregnant. And then there was a postnatal diet that she did to then replenish her stores afterwards that would build up her red blood cells and all these different things. And so iron and zinc and all these different things, we've just gotten away from that. Right. So there's one I want to ask you about though. Your chromium levels were perfect and we almost never see that. Meaning when I say it's rare, I mean 90% of people that we see have lower levels of chromium. So do you take chromium for blood sugar?
No, I don't. I love that though. I feel very special. It is very rare. Ask me if I took it, and I typically will recommend that as a supplement for clients who are trying to balance their blood sugar, but that's never really, even with my stress and stuff, never really been an issue for me, A1C or fasting glucose. So I've never taken it, but I love that my levels are good.
Well, it's very likely you're getting enough chromium. You're getting a good amount of chromium in your diet and you're doing pretty well with your blood sugar. And so you're not depleting it like most people are.
Okay.
All right. And so then the last one before we get to the heavy metals is phosphorus. Okay. And your levels are fantastic, which is great because sometimes when you see a 4 high, you see high levels of phosphorus from muscle tissue breakdown or bone breakdown. Or you see low levels from not getting enough protein in on the body. But your levels are good. And so you're getting enough protein, it seems, on a daily basis, which is great for obviously healthy, strong bones.
Wonderful.
All right, now we move to the heavy metals. There are 5 that we look at: lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, and aluminum. And anytime someone talks about thyroid, I'm always looking at mercury, cadmium, and arsenic. And we're looking at those specifically because we know that they disrupt the thyroid. We know that they can displace iodine, and they can also cause inflammation for women and men that have Hashimoto's. So when we look at your results, you had no lead, which is great, no cadmium, no arsenic, but you did have elevated levels of mercury and slightly elevated levels of aluminum. So mercury is most common from essentially 2 things. There's 2 main sources. One is from fish. That's the main place that we see it. So when I was in college, I was a poor college student. Every night I would have a can of tuna over microwave rice with olive oil. Literally, that was my diet every night because I was into bodybuilding and weightlifting and all that good stuff. My mercury was through the roof when I tested around 20 years old, 19, 20 years old, doing the same exact test. So I'm just wondering if that's it for you, or do you have mercury amalgams in your teeth? Because sometimes you'll get it that way too.
So no, I don't have mercury amalgams in my teeth, but what is probably will be interesting to some people who are listening is my diet is completely like my source of protein for the most part is whether it's either protein powder or fish, because I'm pescatarian. I don't eat chicken. I don't eat red meat. And so I'm eating fish multiple times a week. And you know what I find interesting, and I think that you'll have some insight into this that I don't have, is that I am very fascinated by the blue zones and like these people who live the longest and all of that kind of stuff. And what I think we find most from their diets is like they're living in places where they're eating tons of fiber, which I do, and they're eating a good amount of fish. And so I'm wondering if like, are these people very intentional about making sure that they keep their fish to like only 3 times a week, or like, because how do they prevent their mercury levels from getting high if they're eating it regularly?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And so I think that, there's 2 main reasons. And so I've studied the blue zones inside and out. I actually just put on an event with Dan Buettner for our high performance health group. We have great conversations. And there's a couple things that, Dan and I disagree on, but like nothing major. We believe the data, like we believe what we're seeing with our own eyes and that we can qualify. And I agree with 90% of what he teaches, or it doesn't even teach, what he's gathered from information over the last 25 years. And so what you'll find though, is when you go to Ikaria, Greece, or Sardinia, or you go to the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, you're finding that people are eating the smaller fish, which are low in mercury. So the best omega-3 fish that you can get are wild salmon. Now it's a larger fish. So that one's a little bit of an outlier. Why does salmon help with omega-3s, but not high in mercury? Because it's a vegetarian fish. So basically it's a fish that doesn't eat other fish. So it doesn't build up mercury, which I always found super interesting. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But then there's mackerel. So when you look at a lot of these, every single one of them except Loma Linda are all in the water. And so when you look at them, they're catching fish. There's no doubt about that. But they're getting the mackerel. They're getting sardines. Like that's a big one over in the Mediterranean-based diet. Sardines is a huge one. Anchovies. So all of these are low in mercury. The ones that we need to watch out for are the swordfish, a lot of the larger Chilean sea bass, which is a delicious fish, but it's one that can have a lot. And tuna, that's another one as well. We actually have a chart that gives you the high, the medium, and the low mercury fish, and we're happy to share it with your audience as well. If we just want to put
that, I'll link that. If you guys send it to me, I'll link that in the show notes, because I think that's super interesting. I think that knowing that, one question I do have for you on this before we talk about aluminum is supplements. So you mentioned omegas, like so many of us, including myself, and I'm trying to be really mindful about where that comes from, and like having, something with krill oil or things like knowing the source and making sure, because I've heard a lot and researched a lot about how we can get mercury from omega supplements. Do you feel like that can be a big contributor, or is it more so if you're eating the fish?
Well, so there's omega-3 supplements can be one of the most powerful supplements that, like, top 5, without a doubt, in the world, out of the thousands of supplements that are out there, right? Top 5 in the world for studies behind it and research for longevity, but also the top 5 causes of mortality, which are cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, high blood pressure and stroke, type 2 diabetes, cancer, and Alzheimer's. So omega-3s helps across the board with that. And you only need like 2 grams a day. You need more EPA than DHA, right? But you're right. If you buy your omega-3s from an unreputable source, they're going to be oxidized. They're not triglyceride bound. They're not cold processed, and they're probably not tested for heavy metals like mercury. And so you want to look at what type of fish does this come from? Is it tested for heavy metals? Is it cold processed, non-oxidized? So we use a product called Daily Omega-3 Support. And we actually do omega-3 testing. So I'd love to get you one of those labs too, because it will tell you exactly how many omega-3s you need as compared to omega-6s, right? So you take your omega-6s, nothing lives in a vacuum, to your omega-3s, and you can actually see your exact ratio. And the perfect ratio is about a 3-to-1 ratio from omega-6s to omega-3s. A lot of people say it's a 1-to-1. It's really not. Our body actually needs some of those omega-6s for the cell membrane. But it's just the average American's an 18-to-1 or greater from omega-6s to omega-3s. That's why they have so much inflammation in their body. So,
okay. And that's mostly coming from diet, which is a whole conversation that we could
That's another whole conversation. Yes. On the standard American diet. That's right. Exactly.
Okay. So now my aluminum levels.
Yes. The aluminum levels, this is the one that we find to be ubiquitous in the environment. And we always see like a small elevation. Now, some people have a high elevation. You don't. Okay. You have a small elevation, enough to be able to bring it down still. So the main places
deodorant most of the time, because I know I use a clean deodorant, but I'm like, where is this coming from?
Yeah, so we always see it a little elevated typically because it's so ubiquitous. So it's in tap water, it's in ice. So like if you go out to a restaurant and you drink ice water, you go get an iced tea somewhere, it's in water. And the reason why it's in the water is they use aluminum. Believe it or not, it's called an ionic surfactant. So essentially, what it does is it binds to other metals and it pulls them to the bottom. But what you're left with then is still aluminum. So you're not left with a lot of the other harmful ones, but you still have some aluminum. But then there is antiperspirants. You said you're not using that. There's aluminum cookware. So it looks like stainless steel, but it's aluminum. And people used aluminum for such a long time because it's so lightweight and it heats up quickly. So aluminum core is okay, but you don't want aluminum cookware. And I'm assuming you probably switched that out as well, right?
Yeah, all of that stuff is non-toxic. So it's really about like the stuff that you can't necessarily control, like going out to a restaurant.
Yeah, it can be in cosmetics. It can be in so many different things, but I'm sure you're using like the, EWG.org and the Skin Deep to look at all those. Yeah. So what can happen though is this, and this is actually a really good point. So you could have had high aluminum 5 years ago. We don't have a baseline lab on you, right? Like that's the hard thing. That's why I always say people should test their kids like as young as they can, have a baseline as to where you are. And then if you do it annually or even semi-annually, then you can look at where you are and, oh, I was exposed to aluminum and here's why. And so you can kind of go through that process. So what we recommend, we will never know how you might have been exposed unless you know how you were exposed. Like if we see higher iron, or lead, I should say, we sometimes know. We ask qualifying questions because it's so rare to be exposed by lead. Like what happened? And we kind of walk the process back. But we recommend something called a heavy metal detox or heavy metal protocol. And that's by Equalife as well. But I always tell people, you don't need to use the ones by Equalife, but you can see exactly what we do that we know works. Right. So we use things like Craxel chlorella. We use cilantro. We use certain herbs that are able to naturally bind. So you don't have to go through stronger chelation-based processes. We use a biofilm disruptor because so many of these heavy metals end up in your intestines and actually bound up in something called a biofilm. And then the last part we use is something to actually bind them up and remove them from their body. And that's all natural as well. So you do that. It's an 8-week protocol. And then the nice thing is you're going to drop down to the lowest level of aluminum and hopefully no mercury. And then you know that you're good. And so if you switch your diet to lower mercury fish and you do the heavy metal detox protocol, then you're good. And you still test just to make sure there wasn't some random exposure because we don't always know. Like that's the thing is like these metals, like you're not biting on a piece of mercury, right? Like that's not how these things work. And so they are microparticles that can build up over time.
So fascinating. This has been so enlightening. And like I said, I will come back and like do this, I like to do my labs honestly every 3 months. To me, like that's gives me the data that I need to make the choices that I want for somebody who's coming to you from our show and, buying a kit or whatever. How often should they be doing this?
Well, in an ideal world, it's every 6 months, but for most people, it's annually. So we do something called a Big Five. The lab you did today was one of those 5 labs. So the other parts of the Big Five are food sensitivities from an IgG perspective, basically delayed response, which causes inflammation as well. Then we look at the gut, which is the Candida metabolic and vitamins test, and it looks at your vitamins levels because we looked at your mineral levels today, but not like your methylated Bs and all of those. And then the other one is the omega-3 inflammation test that we just spoke about. So it's going to look at your omega-6s to omega-3s. And then the last one is going to be, if I jog my memory here, the stress, mood, and metabolism, which is the one that I definitely want you to run. And that's all your hormones. And so that gives you a complete picture of your body, all the underlying root causes. And it doesn't allow you to get too out of balance for too long if you're running those every 6 to 12 months. And for some people do is they run them once a year. If anything's off, they do a protocol that's built to help them get back on track. They can then retest only the ones they were off, make sure they're now good, and then just test again annually. So that to me that's precision-based healthcare instead of sick care, which obviously so many people are a part of.
100%. And that's what, if I could empower, anyone who's listening today, that's what we want, is to it's prevention, not to get you to the point where you actually don't feel good. And so I love everything that you're doing. I'm so grateful for your time today. Thank you for looking at my labs and doing all of this. Has been so fascinating. I know our listeners are going to absolutely love this. The last thing that I ask every guest that we have on the show is, I think that we all live crazy lives at this point. The world is, especially in American society, go, go, go. If there's one piece of advice you could give our audience in terms of how they can balance the chaos, because that's the name of our show, what is the piece of advice you'd want to give?
Focus on no more than 2 to 3 priorities in life. That's the biggest thing that I can share with people, because, and I also say, throw out your to-do list and schedule everything. Now, in the beginning, that might seem chaotic as well, but the best thing that I've given for people with overwhelm, irritability, and anxiety in my practice is that you only get 16 or so hours in a day, right? Because you're in bed, hopefully, for 8 of those. Schedule your day. If things don't fit, you can't do it. And if you know your top 2 to 3 priorities, for me, it's family, then it's work, then it's my health. It should be health first or second, but at least where I am in this phase of my life, there's a lot that I'm trying to do, a lot that I'm trying to teach, and that's where I am right now. But I have those 3 priorities, and they always have to fit in every single day. Not some days, but every day. And that, to me, not only does it reduce stress, because I can say no to a lot of other things, which allows you to do that if you know your top priorities. But the thing is, at the end of the day, you can say, this was a good day. I did all the things that I know that I need to do. And so that's my advice.
I love that so much, for the purpose of the fact that that's actually the very first exercise that I give clients. I say values. I say, what are your top 3 values? And how do we start to strip away things that don't align with those values? And so I love that that was the piece of advice that you gave, because it is literally so aligned with everything that I do. So thank you so much again. Dr. Cabral, where can everybody find you? We're going to link Equilife in the show notes, but talk to us about where people can find you and find your Instagram and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, so my name's Stephen Cabral with a PH. So that's my website, stephencabral.com. You'll find the same one on Instagram. I love connecting with people there. So that's probably the top channel. My podcast is the Cabral Concepts, and you can find that anywhere that a podcast is played. And then I know that we're going to give you a link for this lab here today, do something for your community as well. But the truth is, if anybody has any questions, just reach out. Just let us know how we can help, and we'll be there for you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We'll get all of this stuff linked up so you guys can go and grab the test that I did off Dr. Cabral's site. Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you.
I hope that you loved that episode and that you found some helpful tools and insights to help you heal and come back to the most vital version of yourself. If you did, please rate, review, and subscribe to our show. That's the best way to support us. You can follow me on Instagram at Wellness by Kelley, and sign up now for the 7-day free trial of the WBK app and our health and hormones course through Labor Day. When you do, you'll get 20% off of the course and 10% off the annual membership. For the course, use the code BalancingChaos20, that's BALANCINGCHAOS20. And for the membership, use the code BalancingChaos, all one word. In our course, you'll get access to an emailed lab review, plus protocols that are built out to help you heal whatever hormonal imbalance you're struggling with. For our membership, you'll receive a library of content in our app with low-impact workouts, blood sugar balancing recipes, and mindfulness meditations, all designed to help you balance your hormones naturally and feel like your most beautiful, joyful, and vital self. Thanks so much for joining me. See you in the next episode.